Shabbat Shalom. We welcome you virtually to yet another Torah study. We miss being in person, at least I do. But thank you for continuing to grow your soul and your mind and to study some Jewish texts. We always like to begin with a blessing. So I say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise and thank the powerful source of the universe who commands us to busy ourselves with these sacred texts and words. I'm going to say a few opening words about the Torah portion itself. Then we'll do a little brain candy and study some text. And then I'll offer a few drashot, a few dvar acher, we like to call them, differing opinions on the text itself. I want to say up front during this pandemic that, our heart goes out to all the people who are sick and the ones who are on the front lines fighting the sickness. Being sick is frustrating, and it's stressful, and it's anxiety producing, and it's scary. The coronavirus has interrupted our lives. It's interrupted our work, vacations. It's interrupted the flow of our everyday activities, and it has canceled our collective gatherings. And this week's double Torah portion, Tazria Metzora, is for many people rather difficult and kind of icky reading because of its detailed and rather graphic descriptions of skin diseases and bodily fluids. The Torah describes these ailments through the lens of tameh, impure, and tahor, pure, as if to say that when a person is sick or experiencing some kind of physical, mental, or spiritual pain or discomfort, that they're in a state of ritual impurity, and the Torah tells us they are to remove themselves from the community, sequester themselves, quarantine is the term. To some degree, we know this makes sense. But in the world of the Bible, physical illness was understood as a consequence of wrongdoing. One midrash from our tradition teaches that God inflicted tzara'at, this scale-like disease, as punishment for libel or bloodshed or vain oaths or sexual crimes, robbery, and even refusal to offer tzedakah could get you sick. So, it's theologically challenging to think that God punishes us for our sinful actions by making us ill. That's not exactly the way I want to think about my relationship with God. And here nowadays, in moments where I feel like people might need us the most, we are removed from each other, from the community, just like in ancient days, rather than brought close. It would be awful to suggest that the reason why a person had cancer or depression or some other illness was because they violated some commandment of God. Our theology has developed since ancient biblical times, and yet there is a certain relationship between health and purity. Frequently, when we are feeling unhealthy, we also lack a balance and harmony in our lives, and this is now true of the whole planet. When people struggle physically or mentally, it's often difficult to connect with other people around you. And nowadays, we don't even have anyone around us, or not a lot of people. So similarly, when we do not nourish our souls and take care of ourselves by eating right and sleeping enough and exercising, we can become physically run down, drained. We may even make ourselves sick, more susceptible to this virus, I would argue. Regaining equilibrium in our lives is more difficult when we lack sort of the purity of heart and of spirit. So the Torah portion this week says a person who has a skin infection should call out tameh, tameh, like impure, impure, before removing themselves from the camp to allow time for healing to take place. And the Babylonian Talmud in Moed Katan 5a, it says that the purpose of this declaration is not only to make sure that no one else gets sick, but more importantly, to elicit compassion and prayers for those who struggle with illness. It's a way of seeking support based on what sick people need. That's sort of like when we call out their names during the Misha Berach, announcing to everyone that they have needs. So whenever someone asks me to put them on that list, to pray for them in times of illness, I will frequently respond, well, what would you like me to pray for? Um, Reciting Tameh Tameh is not only about alerting the community, but it's also about listening to the needs of those that are in need of our support. So when we pray Rifuat HaNefesh, Rifuat HaGuf, right, healing of body or healing of soul, or Rifuat Shlema, complete healing, we are really seeking the support or to support the sick people in ways that speak to them so that they can experience strength and our empathy and our compassion and our companionship on this journey towards hopefully shlemut, towards mental, physical, and spiritual wholeness, especially when complete healing isn't possible. So I admit that the system set up in the Torah, it's not a perfect parallel to what we are experiencing today. And yet, these two portions remind us of the importance of engaging in regular self-reflection and reminding us to take good care of our physical, mental, and spiritual needs, and to pay attention to the needs of the other people around us. So if you're not feeling so well, or if you're really sick, may God heal you, body and soul. And all of us who are experiencing any kind of pain, may that cease, or loneliness, and may our strength increase, and our fears be released, and may all of us be surrounded by blessings and by joy and by love. A little bit of brain candy from Rabbi David Wilpe. Floating takes faith, and he writes, "Books are grand, but life comes first. People say that life is the thing," says the essayist Logan Pearl Smith. But I prefer reading. Judaism is a tradition of study. But study alone is not Judaism. Books have their wisdom, but the world transcends what one can find in books. Martin Buber writes that he was content to spend all day in a room, poring over books, but only because he knew that he was able to go open the door and see a human face. According to the Midrash, when Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh, proclaiming the sovereignty of God, Pharaoh consulted his wise men, and they scoured all the books and all the libraries, but could find no mention of this strange God. Therefore, they concluded God did not exist. And that Midrash is partly a message about knowing which books to consult. More deeply, it tells us that consulting books alone is not adequate to penetrate to the core of things, of knowledge. Alongside study, there must be an encounter. Next to learning, there must be living. Spinning books into more books, words into more words, is a temptation for those who love Judaism's intellectually charged tradition. And I know that's a bunch of us at BLT. But the Midrash, it has other wise words. He definitely makes us consider Rabbi Wilpe Thoreau, who wrote 2,000 years later. How vain it is to sit down to write, he admonishes in Walden, when you have not stood up to live. Books are grand, but life comes first. Got one more piece of brain candy. I got two poems to share. One's from Parashat Tazria, the other Metzora, and they go like this. When a woman carries a grain of rice, invisible inside her rounded belly, when she has to pee every half hour, though her bladder isn't yet under pressure, when her breasts grow tender to the touch, and exhaustion wipes her across the floor, when baggy shirts become insufficient, and strangers start darting glances, when people want to rub her belly as though she were a good luck Buddha, when her back aches, when what's inside shifts, kicks her in the ribs, somersaults, when she goes on long walks, eats spicy food, has vigorous sex at 39 weeks, anything, to move them through the narrow place into whatever liberation is coming. When a woman gives birth to an infant, Even the air around her crackles. Euphoria and overwhelm and tears settle in for a month, maybe two, of blood and bloody fluids, tiny fingernails and eyelashes, everything she thought she knew, changed by the enormity of being like God and shaping new life in her compassionate womb. And from Torah, from Leviticus, we read this week, if the plague again breaks out in the house, after the stones have been pulled out, and after the house has been scraped and replastered, the priest shall come to examine, and if the plague has spread in the house, it is unclean. It's from Leviticus chapter 14, verses 43 and 44. I think of houses after Katrina, walls marred when the waters receded. Spores reddish or green erupting like an epidemic in old soft stucco. The X marking doors where bodies were found, empty-eyed and bloated, like the startling slash of blood on lintels where death spares us. But our lives can suppurate beneath the seen surface. Bruises don't always show. Notice the subtle signs. Empty out the dwelling. Rot threatens the timbers. Resist temptation to plaster. Cast out the stones and pull down walls. Save what you can and torch the rest outside the city line. 2 poems about our Torah portions this week in a pandemic. Lance Armstrong used to be a pretty big hero of mine. He's my hero because after being diagnosed with stage 4 testicular cancer that had metastasized to other organs already, including his brain, he rebounded from chemotherapy to win one of the most punishing events in all of sports. The 3-week, 2,286-mile Tour de France. That's a comeback. A comeback tale even Hollywood really couldn't top, even if he cheated. But he's also my hero because he used his victory lap around the talk show circuit to become really a role model for cancer patients, declaring that he was, quote, far prouder of being a cancer survivor than of winning the Tour de France. He was also my hero because he had a cat named Chemo. Proof, I think, that humor did not depart from him, even in his darkest hours. And that's my hope, that humor is not departing from us. I mean, the fact that he was even able to ride a bike again, let alone compete, something of a medical miracle. And it's a rousing tribute to a certain indomitable grit. Every one of us is facing some hardships, and we will throughout the course of our lives. Times when we are surrounded by fear. Times when adversity seems to slap us in the face. Times when we experience profound loss. And times like these, when we're sort of sequestered. The physical and mental challenges that lie ahead for us all may often seem completely out of our control. What is in our control is how we respond to the challenges that life provides us. Lance Armstrong's outlook remained strong, all while he was affected with a horrible, horrible disease, a life-threatening disease. Something one could argue of a biblical Torah, a kind of disease we learn about in our Torah portion this week, where God commands us regarding community procedures for what is to be done in the event there's a plague. So the Bible calls this disease tzara'at. And I'd like to walk you through, and together we can examine the process in the Torah for keeping in mind the historical context, of course, for what's supposed to be done, and then compare it in a manner to that which we sort of are treating the ill today. We learn from the parasha that when afflicted with tzara'at, one is to be huva el ha'aharon ha'kohen, brought to Aaron the priest, o el echad mi banav ha'kohanim, or to one of his sons, the other priests. And then we read the ra'a ha'kohen et ha'nega, that the priest is going to see the affliction. If the affliction is deep, then the sick person is to be isolated for 7 days, quarantined. We're familiar with the term. Relieved entirely of a variety of responsibilities. And this allowed them the privacy, maybe, to concentrate solely on healing. I don't think it was an accident that the period was of a certain amount. There in the Torah, it's 7 days, like the 7 days of creation, period opening a door for a potential rebirth, to help return to order the chaos that sickness and death bring. Certainly for the sick person, it was a powerful time, just like for us, it's a powerful time. And the Torah forces them, and by extension us, to focus on sort of recovering and relaxing and self-care. And then after this time period, if the affliction remains unchanged in color and had not spread, or if it had faded, the person is to purify themselves. They're supposed to wash their clothes, spend another 7 days in quarantine, and then at the end of this second 7-day period, the priest, of course, examines the individual again, sort of like a follow-up visit. And if the affliction has faded and has not spread further on the skin, then the priest announces him as being clean. So what do we learn about this ritual procedure from the Israelites? First and foremost, there is the importance of being seen. How often do the sick in our communities stay out of public places, right? Some people are afraid of what others might say or not say. Some are embarrassed or just don't want to have to make the small talk. They're scared of how their contemporaries will react to their illness. So Rashi points out that when a person recovers from tzara'at, they're obligated to shave, to cut their hair, and to bring 2 birds as sacrifice, as a means of purification. Similarly today, all those who recover from illness sort of rejoin the community, as we hope we all will one day. We see them shave or put on makeup or get a haircut or enhance their appearance in some way so that it reflects their desire to re-enter the community. I think we're going to see this. I mean, I'm sitting here not in a collared shirt doing my Torah study. I could probably use a little bit of a shave, but hopefully when we all come together again, we'll be excited to present ourselves differently. Anyway, having been sort of outside the camp and then persevering, like we will, our lives are going to be changed in profound ways. And activities that I think at certain times when we took them for granted, they're going to be approached with a whole new level of appreciation. Imagine how delicious certain foods are going to taste, that we haven't had in a while, or going to your favorite restaurant again if it's still there. How much more meaningful the words, how about nikavim, nikavim, halulim, halulim? The idea when you're sick or you recover from something like colon cancer and you thank God for all the holes in your body that work. I know one elderly gentleman who had fallen and broken his hip. He was learning to walk again at 92. And he commented to me how anxious he was to be able to go back to synagogue and utter the words, Modeh ani lefanecha. Thank you, God, for letting me stand before you. Over the time I've been a rabbi at Congregation Micah and previously in Seattle and California, I've had to help some congregants with some pretty heavy issues. We faced some sexual abuse and deaths of loved ones and so much sickness. All different kinds of tzara'at. And more and more it occurs to me that Congregation Micah, that's one of the places we bring our pain to the community. And in a way, rabbis serve as today's priests. We are, Baruch Hashem, thank God, not doctors, not on the front line of this pandemic. But we also have a responsibility, an ability to respond as Jewish leaders, battling through these painful experiences requires bravery and leadership and compassion and strength. It takes strength. It takes strength to be a member of a community and to care about other people and to help others battle back from adversity. So, Judaism itself is a living organism. It's its own teacher. It knows both pain and resilience. The Jewish experience, as recorded in the Torah and throughout history, provides us with endless archetypes of heroes and heroines who face and defeat all types of Goliaths. The truth is that there's no one easy way to face adversity and survive. We're all getting through this on our own. But I do have some suggestions that maybe could help, and they come from the tradition. Kohelet writes, Chachamut hamshalosh lo v'himer yimetek, that a threefold cord is not as easily severed. We learn from our tradition three profound elements that I think can help us. Community, God, and spiritual strength. Most of us know the power of relationships, especially when disaster strikes. And so during these turbulent times, I do hope you are reaching out to others, and others are reaching out to you. During times of real trouble like this, family, friends, they are very powerful. Even if they're only on Zoom or on the phone or Facebook, they can be a helpful force. So we've been doing funerals, Rabbi Lori and I, on Zoom and making Shiva calls and providing virtual shoulders to cry on. All of us have had experiences where we wouldn't have made it through if it wasn't with the help of, you fill in the blank. And sometimes that blank is Micah, or the people at Micah. So at the most difficult moments in our lives, our relationships are not merely rewarding, they are life-sustaining. Survivors of the Shoah, the Holocaust, when describing their stories, often speak of helping each other, as if by instinct. And their experiences suggest that when conditions become extreme, a need to help actually arises. There is no more terrible, no more beautiful an example than the way the Jewish people helped each other during the days and weeks of what came to be known as the death marches. Here's a testimony of one young woman. After an hour of indescribable distress, Benzi pleaded with us to drop him and leave him to his fate. We knew only too well that the lines of the SS marching at the rear would riddle his body with bullets once he was helpless. We drew upon our reserves and strength and dragged him along. Where does strength like that come from? The last expense of energy among men and women themselves nearly dead. That is one of the central mysteries of life's resilience. And still it's clear that having come as far as they had, several of the survivors felt the need to stick together, no matter what. Owing each other their lives is not a metaphor here. Our lives are far different from the generation that came before us in Europe. And still, even today, what we do has the potential to help others. One woman I remember was speaking with Rabbi Lori back when she was in Los Angeles. And she was all alone and she was isolated. And when the temple community she was working with heard that she needed rides to the hospital for chemotherapy, they just worked out a volunteer schedule. And they got her there. And they stayed with her. And they held her hand. And they made sure she was seen. We also learned from the Torah that, when Miriam was afflicted with Tzara'at, that the Israelite community, lo nasa ad ha'asef Miriam, that they did not journey until Miriam was brought back in. The community was affected because one of its members was afflicted. So, Micah is a caring community. We conduct healing services. We visit people in the hospital. At least we used to when we were allowed. We try to build strong communal relationships. So when people come to us with tzaraat or tsuris of any kind, we have the strength of community to help carry their heavy loads because we put them on all of our shoulders. The second piece of this puzzle is God. There are stories upon stories in our tradition that tell of how God can be a source of strength. We just sat around a Seder table and told such a story, right? Joseph, the biblical character, is a perfect example. He descends into the depths of a pit only to rise to the status of a prince. And never once in all of his trials and tribulations do we hear him wallowing. Is there ever a sense that he feels his own situation is hopeless? Doesn't seem it. We're not hopeless either. We read just like him, Vayahi Adonai et Yosef, God was with Joseph. Vayahi ish matzliach, and he became a successful man. Part of his success was his awareness of the divine. So how might we discover the divine? How might we develop a relationship with God? It begins, I think, with recognizing that there is just something bigger and larger than us out there. If the coronavirus has taught us anything, it's that something can be invisible and very real. Each of us reaches out to God, regardless of our concept of what God is, in a variety of different ways. Some connect with God in certain ways, others experience God, or they argue with God, or at least they say that they do. And when it comes down to it, how open and willing are we really? How many of us are actually capable of connecting with a divine source, of helping others to do that? The Misha Barak prayer has grown very popular in the Reform worship. I mean, is it any wonder? Invoking God's name during the Torah service or on Friday night services or in the hospital room at the bedside of a patient, it is not just a petition for help. It is an invitation for God to be part of the conversation, to enter the room. In times of crisis, praying can help. We can pray for the strength to endure whatever will happen. We can pray that God will somehow help the situation. And the Talmud tells us that one who prays for someone who is ill removes 1/60th of their illness. Now, I do not necessarily believe in a God who cures cancer. And yet I cannot help praying for such a result. There's a story of a man who looked up at the heavens and said, "Dear God, there's so much pain and anguish in the world. Why don't you send help?" And God answered the prayer. God said, "I didn't send help. I sent you." Third part. The biggest, most powerful personal challenge we're facing. We cannot always count on miracles to save us. We have to learn to be miraculous ourselves. Our ancestors taught us that surviving requires personal strength. Think of Ruth as we move towards the holiday of Shavuot. No sooner did we meet her than she becomes a widow. Faced with the loss of her spouse, she manages to gather her strength and go forward with life. No one had more of a right to feel threatened, to feel sad, to feel afraid than Ruth. A foreigner who was described as searching for her next meal in the fields. But by the end of this short story, we are inspired by Ruth's triumph over adversity. She exemplifies our human potential to overcome loss and achieve greatness. Each of us have our own ways of coping, of reaching deep down inside ourselves and finding the spiritual strength to move on. Whether facing this pandemic, or the loss of a job, or threats to your health, or the loss of a loved one, whether this is testing your marriage or other relationships, any type of tzara'at you have, each of us has the need and the capability to develop our own capacities to live under the pressures of crisis, to learn to remain sane and alive and human after having sustained damage or pain to our minds, to our bodies, to our souls. And it's also essential that we recognize how difficult it is, to comfort people. How some of what we will confront forces us to recognize is that there will come a time for us all when we won't rebound. Each of us is destined to face that great crisis, and yet, can't we face it with grace? Kohelet writes that the threefold cord is not easily severed. He didn't write never. And in life's challenges, different things work for different people. Lance Armstrong named the cat named Chemo. He's pretty sick. Yet humor clearly helped him cope with his illness. So we need to help people face their tzara'at with dignity, with grace, and with humor. Life out there is not as simple as, hey, Rabbi, I have a problem. Oh, let me fix that for you. More often than not, we will probably not be able to fix your problems. Priests couldn't fix them either. But they offered a certain response in their time. And I'm suggesting one to help fit ours. Providing comfort through community, if only virtually. Opening the door to a more profound relationship with the unknown. And modeling and encouraging personal spiritual strength. One time I was visiting a terminal cancer patient who said to me, keep your head up no matter what you do. Always battle through adversity. How can I? How can we, given our roles, given our relationships, not strive to be a little bit more like that good Lance Armstrong? Waking up every day and modeling that message of resilience, especially during these pandemic times. Devar Acher from Parashat Metzorah. Vayetaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. Zot tihyeh Torat HaMetzorah bayom taharato v'huva el hakohen. Vayatza hakohen el michutz lamachaneh v'ra'ah hakohen v'hineh nirpa nega hatzara'at min hatzarah. V'tzivah hakohen v'lakach v'lim taher shtei tzparim chayot techorot v'etz erez v'shnei ta'olat v'ezov. Powerful stuff, don't you think? It's poetic. Would help anyone understand if I also translate the passage into English? I'll do that. It says, God spoke to Moses. That's what he said. He said, this shall be the law of the leper. At the time when it is to be cleaned, when it has been reported to the priest shall go outside the camp. And if the priest sees that the leper has been healed of his scaly affliction, the priest shall order 2 live clean birds, cedar wood, crimson stuff, and hyssop to be brought for the one who is to be cleansed. Sounded more poetic in Hebrew, didn't it? Well, it's a little more magical in Hebrew, but the words are powerful even today, even and especially during a pandemic. The Torah portion, Metzorah, leprosy, deals with this variety of these illnesses and the purification rites that accompany their cure. It does include a medical treatise on disease and treatment, but the laws pertaining to the various rites are not totally explained in terms of sanitary measures. Rather, we have rites stemming from the belief that physical disease is a manifestation of spiritual dis-ease. I spoke about not really buying into that theology earlier, but the rabbis of old equate leprosy as being the result of what we call lashon hara, evil talk or slander, gossip. There's even one rabbi, Rabbi Yochanan of the Talmud, who said in the name of Rabbi Yosei ben Zimra that the spreading of evil talk is equal to denying God. And his contemporary, Rabbi Yosei, added that whoever spreads evil talk will be visited by a plague. Anyway, having just celebrated Passover, I couldn't help but at least mention plagues. The specific plague the rabbis taught associated with evil talk or gossip is this leprosy. So why the connection between the two? It's based on a wordplay. Leper in Hebrew, as I mentioned earlier, is mitzorah, and spreading evil talk is motzi shemra. So the similarity between metz and motz, the link between slander and leprosy. Speech, for the Jew, is the one item that separates humankind from the rest of creation. And when God created the world, the vehicle for that creation was speech. God said, Vayehior, let there be light. And there was light. God spoke the world into being. So language in Judaism is very holy. It has the power to heal, and it has the power to hurt. And we human beings have been entrusted with language that we might complete the work of creation by bringing harmony to the world. Just read any thing on the internet nowadays, and you might conclude that we are not doing a good job. So, we're going to take a break for a second from this Devar Hair, and we're going to say something or think something nice. So, either think it, or pause the video, and go tell someone where you live, or send a text or an email. Say something nice, just positive to someone who needs good vibes. I don't care if you compliment, their clothes, or you tell them that you love them. Just pause the video or take the next 15 seconds and say something to the person who's watching it with you, who you haven't been in touch with for a while. Do it right now. Come on. Some of our ancestors dealt with the specifics of the verses I shared in Torah in strange ways. The Shtei Tzparim Hayot Tehorot, these two live, clean birds, according to Rashi, the great 9th century commentator, these birds must be ones that chatter and chirp constantly. Why? In order to remind us of the spiritual dis-ease, the slander, the idle chatter that caused the plague in the first place, according to the sages. 8 erez, cedar wood. Why? Because the cedar tree is often associated with might. You possibly have heard the phrase, the mighty cedars of Lebanon. And here too, Rashi believes that its use is to remind us that haughtiness and that pride, they lead to evil speech. Shnei tolaot ve'ezov, the scarlet, the hyssop, these other weird sort of dyes that are made from a worm, the lowliest of creatures. Hyssop was considered the lowliest of plants. So the cure for leprosy is to let go of pride and to become lowly. While the original intent of the Torah may have been otherwise, for thousands of years now, our people have associated leprosy with slander. There's nothing more harmful, our sages seem to say, than an evil tongue. For this reason, they compare the tongue to an arrow. Because if a person draws an arrow to kill another, the latter begs for mercy, and the would-be slayer feels compassion and sheaths the sword. Whereas an arrow cannot be called back once it has been shot, even if the archer wishes to do so. So slanderers slay other people with their tongue in the same way that archers do so with arrows. And just as victims don't often know about the arrow until it actually arrives, so the effects of evil talk are not really felt by the victim until the arrows of a wicked tongue arrive. We are experiencing a lot of distance right now, a lot of pain. The world before this pandemic still had war and famine, and we're worried that this disease is going to cause further problems. And while it is at least partly our challenge to repair the world, it is certainly a Jewish value for that repairing to begin at home. Don't let that nice thing that you said to someone tonight be the last thing you say this week. Fill your homes and the virtual airwaves, the hearts of your children and parents, your siblings, members of our community, Congregation Micah, all the people that you know, with compliments and with words that create rather than destroy. For only then will the world know shalom, this sense of wholeness and this sense of peace we all pray for. Only then will we achieve this messianic time, when all the spiritual dis-ease that is metzorah, leprosy of any kind, is rid of, when COVID-19 no longer threatens us, and the world might one day be at peace. We're waiting on you, Elijah, and we thank you for this Devar Acher. Our Haftarah this morning comes from the book 2 Kings, chapter 4, verse 42, into chapter 5, verse 19. The Torah portion deals with the treatment of these skin diseases, often referred to as leprosy. And the bulk of the Haftarah here tells of the tale of Naaman, a Syrian general who was healed from a disease by the waters of the Jordan and through the meditation of the prophet Elisha. Elisha was the chief disciple of the illustrious mentor Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah, and was active for about 50 years, 850 to 800 before the Common Era. While Elijah was an outsider, engaged in sort of confrontation with corrupt powers that he found in government and religion, Elisha was the man whose counsel the rulers of Israel actually tended to seek. He'd been a farmer before he became a follower of Elijah, and his concern for ordinary folk sort of never left him. He's the subject of a number of folk tales, and miracles are ascribed to him. The Haftarah itself is taken, like I said, from the second book of Kings. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'mihim tovihim v'ratzav v'divreihem hane'emarim b'emet Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah u'Moshe abdo of Yisrael amoho u'v'indiei ha'emet ha'tzedek. A man came from Baal Shalisha, bringing the man of God bread made of the first barley harvest, 20 loaves, and fresh grain with ears of new corn. So Elisha said, "Give it to the people to eat." His servant said, "How can I put this small amount in front of 100 people?" But he insisted, "Give it to the people to eat. The Eternal has said that they will eat, and there'll be some left over." So he gave it to them, and they ate, and they had some left over, as the Eternal had said. Naaman, the commander of the Armenian army, was important to the king, who valued him highly because, though through him the Eternal had given Amram victory, he was a valiant soldier who had a skin disease. Once, when the Armenians went out on a raid, they carried off a young girl from the land of Israel as a captive, and she became a servant to Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my lord could go to the prophet in Samaria, he could cure him of his skin disease." Well, hearing this, Naaman went to his master and told him, "This is what the girl from Israel said." So the king of Amram said, "Go and take this letter to the king of Israel." So he went, taking along 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. He brought the letter to the king of Israel. It said, "This letter will introduce my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his skin disease." And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, Am I God with the power over life and death, that this fellow man wants me to cure a man of a skin disease? He's obviously looking to pick a quarrel with me." But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent the king the following message: "Why have you torn your clothes? Let this man come to me, and he will learn that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and waited for Elisha at the entrance of the house. And Elisha sent him this message: "Go bathe 7 times in the river Jordan, and your flesh will be cleansed, and and returned to normal. And this made Naaman angry, and he left, saying, I thought he would come out and stand here and call out in the name of Eternal his God, and wave his hand at the spot and cure the disease. Aren't the waters of Amanah and the far part of the rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? Can't I wash in them and get clean? So he walked off in a fury. Naaman's servants went up to him and said, Sir, the prophet asked you to do something elaborate. Or had the prophet asked you to do something elaborate, surely you would have done it. Why not do it then, when he only asked you to wash and be clean? Naaman went down, dipped himself into the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had said, and his flesh became clean, as the flesh of a young child. He and his men returned to the man of God, standing in front of him. Naaman said, Now I know that the God of Israel is the only God in the world. Please now accept a present from me. But Elisha answered, As the Eternal whom I serve lives, I tell you that I will not accept a gift. Naaman entreated him, accept, but he refused. And then Naaman said, If not, please let me have 2 mule loads of earth on which to build an altar back home, because I will never again offer a burnt offering or sacrifice to any god but the Eternal. And I hope that God will pardon me in one thing. When my master goes to the temple of the god of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans on my arm, so that I have to bow down in the temple Rimmon, I hope God will forgive me this one thing that I have done, to bow down to the temple of Rimmon. And Elisha said to him, Shalom, go in peace. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzur kol Yisrael tzur kol haolamim tzaddik b'kol hadorot ha'el ha'ne'emahan ha'omer ve'oseh medaber mekayem shechol devarav emet v'tzedek al haTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al ha'nevim ve'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu liktusha v'linucha lekavod Tifaret al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach u'mevarachim otach yiparach shimcha b'fi kol hai tamid leolam ba'ed baruch atah Adonai mekadesh haShabbat. Good Shabbos to you.